I never thought my dream retirement would start with a chain-link fence cutting me off from my own home. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when I returned from town with a few groceries, humming to myself as I pulled up to the quiet little lane that led to my cottage. But instead of the familiar gravel road winding down to the place I'd poured my life savings into, I found a padlocked fence with a bright red HOA sign that read, "Access closed, unauthorized resident." My heart sank. My groceries sat melting in the trunk while I stood there in disbelief, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The cottage was supposed to be my sanctuary. After decades of hard work as a mechanic, I finally bought a small piece of land on the edge of the lake. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, a white cottage with a blue tin roof, a wraparound porch, and a garden where my late wife used to sit and sketch. We'd planned to grow old together there, but life had other plans. After she passed, that cottage became my last connection to her. The HOA, however, never wanted me there. See, I wasn't part of their gated community. My property was older, sitting just outside their official boundary. But the only way to access it was through a private road that snaked through their neighborhood. For years, it wasn't an issue. I maintained my property, paid for upkeep, and lived quietly. But when new HOA leadership took over, led by a woman named Cheryl, who wore pearls even while yelling at the lawn guy, they decided I didn't fit the image of their pristine community. And that's when the war began. At first, it was little things. My mailbox mysteriously went missing. They complained about the noise when I ran my old lawnmower. They even wrote me letters demanding I paint my cottage beige like their houses. I ignored it all. I didn't answer to them. I wasn't even under their jurisdiction. But Cheryl didn't like that. The fence was their final move. They thought they'd boxed me out, that I'd have no way to reach my home. I stood there in shock, but after a moment, I laughed. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. See, I may be retired, but I'm not powerless. My years as a mechanic weren't just spent fixing engines. I'd also done side work, investing carefully and quietly. I'd saved more than most people guessed. And I'd learned a lesson long ago. If someone tries to take away what's yours, you don't yell, you don't fight dirty, you outthink them. So I hired a lawyer. We reviewed land deeds, old maps, and property rights. That's when I learned something that made me smile so hard my cheeks hurt. The road the HOA guarded so fiercely, it wasn't owned by them. It was still under private ownership by the original developer's estate. And guess what? That estate had been trying to sell off unused assets for years. I made a few calls, pulled some savings, and within 2 weeks, the papers were signed. The road, every single inch of it, now belonged to me. The day I showed up with the deed in hand, HOA members were hosting a board meeting in the clubhouse. I parked right in front, walked in with my boots still dusty from the lawyer's office, and laid the folder on their polished oak table. Cheryl smirked when she saw me, but that smirk vanished when she read the first page. "This can't be legal," she hissed. "Oh, it's legal," I said calmly. "In fact, from this moment on, every vehicle that enters or exits your neighborhood does so by my permission. So if you want to keep using my road, we'll need to talk about terms." The room went dead silent. You could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. One man dropped his pen. Another cleared his throat nervously. For once, Cheryl had nothing to say. Over the next week, I worked out a contract. They could keep using the road, but they'd pay a yearly fee, one that I planned to donate to local charities and veterans groups. I also made them remove the fence immediately and issue a written apology. But I didn't stop there. I rebuilt the little gravel lane with fresh stones and added a wooden sign at the entrance that read, "Welcome, respect your neighbors." Every time Cheryl drives by, she has to see those words. Now, I sit on my porch each evening with a glass of iced tea, watching the sunset reflect off the lake. Neighbors sometimes stop to wave, a few even apologize for how the HOA treated me. And though Cheryl still glares from her SUV, she can't do a thing about it. I didn't fight them with anger. I didn't let bitterness consume me. I simply turned their own arrogance against them. Because in the end, the strongest walls aren't made of fences or gates, they're made of principle. And mine will always stand taller than theirs. And that cottage, it's still mine, still standing, still filled with memories. No HOA, No fence, no bully in pearls will ever take that away from me. The HOA thought they had me cornered. That fence was their big victory, the final nail in the coffin they believed would push me out for good. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the kind of man to roll over and give up. I spent hours that night at my kitchen table with papers spread out, coffee going cold, and the old lamp buzzing above me. My lawyer, an old fishing buddy named Ray, leaned back in his chair, grinning as he flipped through the maps. "Jack," he said, tapping the blueprint, "they fenced you out of your own property, but they made a fatal mistake. This road here," he jabbed at the map, "it's not theirs. It's privately held. The developer's estate still owns it, and from what I've heard, they're desperate to offload old assets." I sat there in stunned silence. Could it really be that simple? By the next morning, I was on the phone with the estate's agent. To my surprise, they weren't just willing to sell me the road, they practically begged me to take it off their hands. Years of unpaid taxes, zero maintenance, and no real use for it anymore. For a price that made me laugh, I secured the entire stretch of asphalt that connected every pristine cul-de-sac, every luxury home, every inch of their so-called kingdom. I'll never forget the moment I signed that deed. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from sheer satisfaction. They thought they'd locked me out, when in reality, I'd just been handed the keys to their front door. That Saturday, I drove my old pickup right up to the clubhouse. A board meeting was in session, with Cheryl presiding at the head like some queen on a throne. She was in full pearls, sipping iced tea with that permanent sneer plastered on her face. I walked in carrying a leather folder under my arm. Everyone stopped talking. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing something was coming. "Mr. Daniels," Cheryl said with that fake smile, "you're trespassing again. We made it very clear you're not welcome on HOA property." I laid the folder on the table and slid it across to her. "Funny thing about that," I said. "This isn't your property, it's mine." The second she opened it, her smile vanished. Her face drained of color as she read the first line of the deed. Around the table, gasps and murmurs filled the room. One man leaned over to read it himself and nearly choked on his coffee. This can't be real," Cheryl stammered. "Oh, it's real," I said calmly. "Every car, every delivery truck, every garbage collector that comes in or out of this neighborhood does so on my road. And if you'd like to continue using it, well," I leaned on the table and looked Cheryl dead in the eye, "we're going to have to come to an agreement." For the first time since I'd moved there, Cheryl didn't have a single word to say. The silence in that clubhouse was sweeter than any victory I'd ever known. For years, Cheryl and her little circle had lorded their power over me like royalty ruling a kingdom. But at that moment, they weren't rulers, they were subjects, and I was holding the crown. Finally, one of the board members cleared his throat. What exactly do you want from us, Mr. Daniels?" he asked. His voice cracked like a teenager's, and it almost made me laugh. I looked around the table slowly, making sure to meet every pair of nervous eyes before answering. "First," I said, "that fence comes down today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. You're going to restore the lane exactly as it was, and you're going to stay off my property permanently." A few of them nodded immediately, relief washing over their faces as if they'd been waiting for someone to cut Cheryl down to size. But she wasn't about to surrender so easily. "This is extortion," Cheryl snapped. "You can't just buy a road and hold an entire neighborhood hostage." I smiled. "Not extortion, Cheryl, business. You tried to take away my home. I didn't come after you with threats or violence. I came with money, paperwork, and the law. And now, the law says this road belongs to me." I leaned in closer. "And the law also says I get to decide what happens next." Her lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. Ray, my lawyer, slid a second set of papers onto the table. "We've drafted a contract," he said smoothly. "It lays out terms for continued use of Mr. Daniels Road. You'll pay an annual maintenance fee, which Jack has generously decided will go directly to local charities and veterans groups. It's a fair deal, especially considering the alternative." The board members scrambled to read through it. I could see relief in some of their faces. They just wanted this nightmare over with. But Cheryl was fuming, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "You'll never get away with this," she hissed. I chuckled. "Cheryl, I already did." By the end of that meeting, the contract was signed. The HOA agreed to every term. Though Cheryl refused to put pen to paper herself, another member had to do it for her. But it didn't matter. The deal was sealed, and the balance of power had shifted for good. That afternoon, I drove back down the lane. The fence was already coming down, boards and posts tossed aside like the trash they were. When I parked in front of my cottage and stepped out, I swear I could feel the air itself was lighter, freer. I walked up to the porch, sat in my old rocking chair, and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. But I wasn't done yet. No, I had one final message to leave behind for Cheryl and her board. The following week, the HOA had no choice but to live with the new reality. The fence was gone, the lane restored, and cars once again rolled past my cottage like nothing had happened. Except everything had changed. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was the gatekeeper. I could have let bitterness consume me. I could have raised the road fee sky high, made life miserable for the same people who tried to run me out. But that's not who I am. My late wife always told me, "Jack, don't waste your life on grudges. Leave something better behind." So that's what I set out to do. I took a portion of the money the HOA was now paying me and donated it to a local veterans shelter. Another portion went to the town's children's hospital. I even set aside some funds to help maintain the little gravel lane so it stayed in good shape for years to come. But my favorite part was the sign. I had a craftsman in town carve it out of oak, strong, sturdy, built to last. In bold letters, it read, "Welcome. Respect your neighbors." I planted it right at the entrance to the lane, where every single resident and visitor of that neighborhood would see it. A reminder that community isn't about fences, gates, or rules written in fine print. It's about respect. The day the sign went up, I stood back and smiled. Some of the residents driving by waved, sheepishly at first, then more openly. A few even stopped to say they were sorry for how the HOA treated me. Turns out, not everyone supported Cheryl's crusade. Most folks just wanted peace. And then, of course, there was Cheryl. She drove past in her shiny black SUV, her pearl necklace glinting in the sun, and glared at me like I'd stolen her crown. But she didn't say a word. She couldn't. Not anymore. I sat back down on my porch that evening, rocking gently as the lake shimmered in the fading light. For the first time in a long time, I felt my wife's presence beside me, as if she were smiling at what I'd done. I hadn't just defended our little cottage, I'd honored her memory by standing tall without losing myself in anger. The war was over, and I had won, not with fists, not with rage, but with patience, wit, and the quiet strength of knowing I was in the right. And so, my retirement cottage remained exactly what I'd always dreamed it would be, a sanctuary. A place of peace, a place no HOA could ever touch again. Because at the end of the day, fences can be torn down, papers can be rewritten, but respect, once claimed, can last forever.